Most people still think Europe and America are locked into the same financial system forever, but that is not what is happening anymore. Quietly, piece by piece, Europe is building backup rails for payments, data, and trade, not because the partnership is over, but because history taught every empire the same lesson. The moment you depend on infrastructure you do not control, you are no longer fully sovereign. Watch this closely because this story is not really about Napoleon. It's about what powerful nations do when they realize the system they rely on can also be used against them.
Something is happening in Europe that almost no one is talking about. They are building a wall, not out of stone, out of infrastructure, new payment systems, new cloud networks, new chips, new rules. Piece by piece, Europe is separating its financial nervous system from America's. And this is not the first time it's been tried. 2 centuries ago, one man tried to do exactly this. He tried to wall off an entire continent. It cost him everything. But the lesson he left behind is the one Europe is studying now. Napoleon didn't fail because the idea was wrong. He failed because he didn't control the one thing that mattered, the trade routes. Every empire rises on the routes it controls and weakens when someone builds new ones. This is that story. In 1806, Napoleon controlled most of Europe, but he could not touch Britain. The British Navy ruled the seas, and the seas carried the trade. So Napoleon did something no one had tried at this scale. He banned trade with Britain across the entire continent. The continental system, a wall made of policy, an entire economy pushed inward. At first it worked. French industry boomed. Continental trade grew. Britain felt pressure, but walls have 2 sides. What they keep out, they also lock in. Smuggling became an industry. Black markets thrived. Allies grew resentful. Russia broke ranks. The cost of compliance was too high. So Napoleon invaded Russia to enforce the wall. And that decision started the end of his empire. The wall didn't fail because economic sovereignty was a bad idea. It failed because Napoleon didn't control the infrastructure underneath it. Britain controlled the sea, and the sea was the internet of its day. Whoever controls how goods and money move controls who gets to participate. That lesson didn't die with Napoleon, it just changed hands. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, the world rebuilt its financial order. The dollar replaced the pound. America replaced Britain, same architecture, different empires. SWIFT replaced the telegraph, every wire transfer, every cross-border payment. A nervous system built out of rails and permissions. This isn't conspiracy, it's infrastructure. And infrastructure is power. For decades, no one questioned it. The system worked. Trade flowed, money moved. Then 2022 happened. Russia was cut from SWIFT overnight, like flipping a switch. And Europe watched closely, not because they disagreed with the decision, because they understood what it meant.
Hey, real quick, sorry to cut in, but if you're watching this and realizing how fast the world is moving toward financial issues, right? Fractured systems, parallel rails, and financial power plays. This is exactly why you need to think ahead when the rules of money, trade, and access starts shifting. The people who understand the pattern is coming or understand what's going on and they move first, they win. So if you want to get better prepared for financial shocks, uncertainty, and major economic changes, check out the real estate crash course link below. It's built to help you think clearly when the system starts changing faster than people can keep up. All right, links down below. Now let's jump right back in.
If the rails belong to someone else, then so does the off switch. The weapon worked, but the lesson landed on everyone, including allies. Because today's ally is always tomorrow's variable. And no sovereign nation stays comfortable once it realizes its economy runs on rails it doesn't own. So Europe began to build not a wall to block trade, a wall to carry it differently. A second set of rails, Wero, a European payment system, European owned, European controlled, not to replace Visa overnight, but to make sure there is another road. France pushes government data away from foreign clouds. Made in Europe becomes industrial policy, not a slogan, a strategy. Semiconductor investment, data sovereignty laws, digital euro research. Each piece looks small alone. Together they form an architecture. This is not rebellion, it is self-preservation. Because no power that depends entirely on another power's infrastructure survives the moment that infrastructure is weaponized. Napoleon tried to block trade. Europe is trying to build redundancy, not isolation. Parallel rails. Napoleon said, You will not trade with them. Europe now says, we will also function without them. The wall is not to shut the world out. It is to make sure Europe still works if someone shuts them out. And Europe is not alone. China builds alternative payment rails. Russia builds alternative messaging rails. India builds domestic payment rails. The old road still exists, but new roads are opening everywhere. And the more roads there are, the less any single road controls the traffic. So what does that mean for the currency that built its power on being the main road? It doesn't vanish. It doesn't collapse in one dramatic moment. It simply carries less of the world's weight. And when a currency carries less weight, its holders feel it, not in a headline, in purchasing power, in pricing, in rates, in the quiet cost of everything. This kind of transition takes years. It shows up as drift, as small shifts that add up, and it has already started. So think like the merchants who lived through the last transition. When the pound lost its reserve status, it didn't happen in a single crash. It happened as influence moved elsewhere. The people who noticed early didn't panic. They diversified. They held assets that didn't depend on one system. They didn't predict an exact day. They positioned for a direction that was the difference. So watch the rails, not the headlines. Watch for new payment systems gaining volume. Watch for trade settlements shifting. Watch for countries building infrastructure they used to rent. Watch the language. When leaders stop saying partner and start saying sovereign, every empire builds its power on the roots it controls. When new roots are built, the old ones don't disappear. They just stop carrying all the weight they used to. Napoleon's wall failed because he didn't control the seas. Europe's new wall might work because the battlefield is digital. But the real question isn't whether Europe can build new roads. The real question is what happens to the currency that built its power on being the main one. And if the world is quietly building alternative rails, the point isn't to predict a collapse. Most people who try to time history get crushed by timing. The point is to reduce single points of failure. If one payment rail goes down, you have another. If one currency weakens, your entire life doesn't weaken with it. If one institution changes the rules, you're not trapped inside the rule book. That's what the smart merchants did in every transition. They kept options open, they kept mobility, they stayed liquid enough to move, because when new roads appear, power doesn't disappear, it just migrates. And the people who feel it first are the ones who only have one road. How long do you want your future to depend on a system you don't control?